I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in to episode 1 of the Pathmakers podcast. First thing we need to do is welcome our guest today, Mr. Simon Webster, co-founder of Thornbridge Brewery. Thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, pleasure.
And because it's episode 1, I'm going to start off with a bit of an intro into Pathmakers because it's not really a typical podcast. The idea with this is really, it's broken down in a couple things. For one, it's more of like a mini series. There's going to be 6 episodes. This is episode 1. Once those 6 episodes are done, the theme is kind of tackled. We go back to what we do for work.
Yeah.
The second thing is that theme. So what the theme is for these 6 episodes is speaking to the path makers, the folks that have had a significant role in shaping modern beer in the UK today. And then the last thing's around format. Most podcasts will generally go through the journey of the guests and talk through the story. Yep. I know you're familiar. You've done a few yourself. That's not what we're going to do here today. For one, because the 6 guests are folks that are very well known, not just within beer space, but within challenger drinks brands. So a lot of people that are listening or viewing the podcast will already know your story to a degree.
Yeah.
So what we're really interested in is not so much what you did, but the why and how of why you did it and how you did it. Why is that important? So let's go back to the late 90s. Beer was not the most interesting place in the world, right? It doesn't mean there wasn't good beer, but
absolutely.
there wasn't much diversity within beer, styles, number of breweries, that kind of thing, as well as the fact that the volumes were going down. It was not the most attractive industry. And what happened was there was a spark, and there was people that came in and started creating new paths for the product, but also new paths for consumers to come in and experience that and have fun with the category. And that led to this unprecedented boom of the last 15 to 20 years, which if you think of how old of a category beer is, it probably has never experienced something as fast moving in terms of growth, in terms of differentiation as the last 15 to 20 years. And that was because of that path making. So as we sit here today, and obviously all the headlines will obviously lead you to believe that's all doom and gloom. We'll get to that later. But one of the things that we need to keep in mind is we own our own destiny, and we're just one spark, we're one path away from changing the narrative around beer. And what better way to do that than to sit down with the folks that did it over the last 20 years. So speaking of 20 years, that's Thornbridge, isn't it? Right?
Flown by, isn't it? Yeah. Who knew so much would happen?
No kidding, right? So last thing before we get into it is, because we're not going to focus on your story, there might be some people who are listening or watching that don't know the story as well as they would like to. So what I did is, obviously in preparing for this, I went through a lot of podcasts, articles, what you will. I came up with a few suggestions. If you have any to add to this, go nuts. There's a craft beer channel, YouTube, the origins of Thornbridge and Jaipur. I know there's a more recent one on the Burton Union, but there's that one, which is about a 15-minute episode. There's the Hop Forward podcast, which is a much more depth, longer episode. And then there's a great article, 15 Years of Endless Summer, How Thornbridge Jaipur Changed British Beer, and that's by Johnny Garrett. That was on Good Beer Hunting, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
No, I think that's pretty good. If you read up or listen up on that, you have a pretty good idea of the story.
Cool. So you go check those out. They are great. But yeah, with that in mind, let's kick off today.
Right.
And of course, we're going to start with one that is often talked about, which was just Jaipur, right?
Yeah.
But before we actually talk about Jaipur itself, what I'd like to do is ask if you could take us back to that moment in time, like scene setting, right? So take us back to 2005. Don't worry about Jaipur yet, but what is going on at Thornbridge 2005? What does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, back 2005, we were working at the old brewery, just within the hall grounds. And at that stage, Jim and I, at the start of the year, we just employed two young brewers, neither of whom had commercially brewed beer before. One guy, Stefano Cossi, was based in Italy and flew over for the interview. He was a real nerd for yeast and generally sort of beer, but had never only brewed at university. And the other was a graduate from Heriot Watt, Martin Dickey. These two guys came together in January, February of that sort of year. And we were, at that stage, fooling around a little bit, but also because Dave Wickett had been one of the guys to set the brewery up with us, Henny was at Kellam Island, Kellam Island Brewery at that stage, and we were doing some of the other beers for them, sort of thing. So they were brewing lots of Pale Rider and Easy Rider, and we'd do some of the seasonals. And effectively, we were grazing our knees on somebody else's beer and getting a feel for what worked, what didn't work, and playing around with the hops. And that was sort of a pivotal time then where within the industry at that stage, most brewers were using 3 or 4 varieties of hops. Martin and Stefano were young, ambitious, probably chef-like, and there were a lot more ingredients in the cupboard than 3 or 4 hops, and we went for it and we tried different things. They were influenced massively by the American scene, obviously. Okay. Who wouldn't be? So, the pivotal moment of brewing an IPA was very American-inspired rather than UK-inspired.
And what was your brew length at the time?
We'd be doing 30 to 40 casks of beer, that was it.
On each brew, yeah.
On each brew, yeah.
And so they're going about, obviously they're brewing some of the beer from Kellam Island,
yep.
Right? And then in the meantime, you're brewing your own beers.
Yeah.
Starting, first one was Lord Marple's, wasn't it?
First one was Lord Marple's, yeah.
And so was there like a direction to them? Was there like, this is Thornbridge, this is what we want to be, or what guidance was given to them at that time?
I speak to Martin still, and we often say we almost had this sort of, we pinched it from Nike, but it was a bit of just do it. Let's just do it. Let's just try it. We had brews go down the drain.
Yeah.
Not everything worked, but the guys were pretty good at what they did, and they were inspired, as I say, by other sort of styles out there. And by the time early summer had come round, the thirst was for a big IPA. And, 5.9% beers did not exist in the UK, especially on cask.
Yeah.
So, I often say, going back now, if it was 20 years ago now, that'd be a keg beer. We wouldn't have even touched it as a cask beer because there were too many sort of barriers to that style of beer in cask, but somehow we did it, and somehow it succeeded beyond anything any of us had ever hoped for.
And so, I guess have, as you say, just do it.
Yeah.
That beer needed to sell.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was just like, go for it. We just got to sell. But you're not talking about loads of cask here. So part of it was having control on the size.
Yeah. I mean, it felt a lot of cask to us.
Sure.
And again, we're in such a different market 20 years on that we were able to probably sell to rural pubs.
Okay.
It seems odd, but nobody really bought an ABV back then. They bought beer because most beer was 3.8 to 4.2. So, it wasn't particularly a conversation. It was more, I got this IPA, modern IPA sort of thing. People took it. The balance was there in that beer that meant that you didn't necessarily think you were drinking a boozy drink. And it caught a lot of people out, I'll be honest. There were tales of people being Jaipured or being Jaipurly because they'd had 4 pints of beer. But 4 pints of Jaipurs are very different. Very different.
Was the ability to kind of play with things and just do it, like, was that made possible because you had the other part of the business, which was brew the beer for Kellam Island and make revenue off that, or would you have done it anyways?
To be honest, we were relatively, it was a low-cost business in some ways, in that we were in the grounds of Jim's house.
Yeah.
We were benefiting from the duty system back then, which had not long been in, and we were still able to sell everything we brewed. We just didn't brew that much, so we were nursing the business undoubtedly. And you're right, having something else to do as well helped pay the bills.
Sure. Got it. And when you first brewed that because that was brew 3, was it, or third beer?
That was the third beer. Yeah.
Okay. When you brewed that, was it like, yeah, we got it? Like we know?
It was interesting because it was a bit of a moment actually, because Dave Wickett, Dave was a real pioneer of using American hops in beer and things like that. And when he first tasted the beer, we sat out on Jim's lawn with Martin and Steph, and he was like, "That's it." That's it. It was a man from Del Monte moment. He said yes. It really was. It stood out. 20 years on, I still think it stands out as an incredible cask beer. And I often say, even though to start with, people followed us into that space, but I'm not sure there are many blonde, nearly 6% cask beer styles out there now. Yeah. They've certainly plenty of keg beers, but Jaipur still stands there 20 years in, thinking, you know, as sort of king of that space.
And so I've heard a few times about, the third beer, all stuff. One question I haven't heard, what was the fourth beer you made? Do you remember?
The fourth beer...
Was it Jaipur again, or was it something else?
Oh, yeah.
It was.
So again, you know, we were brewing Lord Marples and a pale ale called Blackthorn and Jaipur. So there were the three. It was an interesting thing then, because it very quickly got picked up. It won awards immediately.
Okay.
You know, it was a real eye opener for people. And again, Pete Brown often says, you know, he was drinking in black and white, and then Jaipur just dialed him into he was seeing colour all of a sudden. And then there was a real interest in how the beer was like that. But people were saying it's too strong. So then, you know, after they'd realised how strong, it's too strong. You need to do one about 4%. And I think later that year we actually sort of kicked against that a little bit, and we did a beer called Halcyon, which was 7.7% on cask. Again, making life very, very difficult for us.
Yeah.
So lots of beers came, and they were all utilising some of the American hops that we were sort of using for the first time, some of the New Zealand hops. And then certainly by the end of that year, we were also brewing a beer called St. Petersburg, which is 7.7% Imperial Stout. And at that stage, we were being written about extreme beers. This is where the country, 20 years ago, we were really challenging with the strength of beers at 7.7, 5.9, all the 7.7s. There was no brewdog.
Yeah.
There was nothing. You know, we were the standout in this sea of 4% cask beer. Right. Some good beers, you know, and we weren't the first people to use American hops, of course not. But we were using them in a way that a lot of the UK brewers were restrained almost in some of the styles they could do. They were weighed down by their heritage, and we just didn't have any heritage. So we were very, you know, we were doing what the Americans had done 10, 15 years before, 20 years before, you know, and but in a format that was very traditional with cask beer.
What's interesting now is, like, I was thinking about that, and I think if you look at breweries that start off now, one of the differences, there's obviously plenty of differences, but one of the differences is, like, there is this thing called craft beer now. There's, you know, before there was other things that existed, don't get me wrong, but there's and it's almost like when you start off, this idea of just do it, just go for it, like, there's a risk to that, because if you do something that doesn't fit the mold of craft beer within that, you know, hardcore, very much initial stage audience within beer, if you do something that sits outside that, you're kind of out of out of that already. And then there's this question of who are you for, right? Which I guess hurts the ability to be diverse and just do it. And so you have a lot of people that come out and go, I'm going to be a hazy brewery, and, you know, they experiment with hazy beers, for instance, but they stay within that, right? And just, I was having to think about that, as, like, if we're trying to do different things, like, how does that, you experienced that firsthand. You saw what it was like when you didn't have that mold, or you broke that mold. So for people that are in that mold today, what would you say to them? What do you think about that concept?
I mean, it's an interesting one, because it is a little bit like that now. But again, if you think back to us, we were straddling something there that we didn't know existed, because we're brewing a bitter at 4% Lord Marples and a 5.9% IPA. Arguably now two different audiences, but back then it was the same. We were trying to sell it to the same people. And, you know, there wasn't traditional and modern. There was just beer drinkers. So what we were tending to do is we were trying to excite a beer drinker by saying, you need to see these stories we know about beer. There are all these different styles available that you're not seeing, and we're creating them or recreating them from other styles of beer. So I think we were really driving the appetite of the drinker there. We were leading, they were following, you know, whereas I think a lot of it now, I think 20 years in, I think the drinkers become so well educated, you know, with the plethora of beers around the world, reading about and drinking them, that actually the brewers are probably reacting to the consumer now, as opposed to the consumer reacting to the brewers, which was happening 20 years ago. So again, we do straddle this thing. You know, it's difficult to pigeonhole us. You know, because we do make lots and lots of cask beer. You know, but we do big, strong, barrel-aged stouts.
Yeah.
You know, we tend to do the full range of beers. We sell a lot of lager. You know, we do tend to do that, and we pride ourselves on it. That is one of the things we say. You know, when somebody's, you know, if you don't like Thornbridge beers, you probably because you've not found the right one yet. You know, because we do a lot of different beer. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So, circling back a little bit to Jaipur here for a second, the success of Jaipur. Jaipur is about what, 40% of your volume?
Yeah, rising.
Rising. Okay. So the success of Jaipur, do you put that down more to the creation or how you raised it?
I put it down to serendipity.
Okay.
And I think we helped that along the way, but it certainly came at a time, and you know, I've been quoted before, I have no idea if we started the craft wave or just caught it. I don't know. Well, nobody can ever tell.
Yeah.
But certainly Jaipur came around at a time and seemed really to be in the right place at the right time, and we were able to push it. And one of the reasons we were able to push it was we told stories, and telling stories, I think, sells beer. Because again, you know, even though we were talking about an American iteration of a classic English beer style, we were able to tell the story of the IPA, and also at that same sort of time, you'd also got the real storytellers, whether it be Pete Brown or Adrian Tiernan-Jones, also getting articles into things. So it really was a movement. It was a new wave of beers,
yeah.
And we had people writing about it. So it felt very. It felt very current. It felt very modern. It felt very much of a movement, and you know, it felt a little bit rock and roll, if I'm honest. You know, we were having the guy who was shooting the Octi Monkeys the day before, and then taking pictures of the brewers the next day. So the brewers became rock stars.
Sure.
Because people didn't know brewers. They're just people who worked in the background, and generally we tended to push them to the front, and they were young. And it sort of worked.
Interesting.
Your beer was good as well.
Yeah. So it goes back to what you were saying before, though, like this idea that nowadays you have a very educated consumer. Back then, I guess that was the platform you were able to educate consumers. Yeah. So I don't know. I guess, you know, I don't know if anyone has the answer to this right now. That's the whole point. But like now we have a lot of educated consumers. What do they need? What's the next thing that consumers need?
I think that'll be the hard part, because again, you know, we saw it in Scandinavia when we sell a lot into Scandinavia. You get the early adopters, but then we'll quickly move. What's next? And beer can't continue to do that. I think the interesting part now is probably consistency. It sounds really boring, but consistency and quality should be the real drivers of this sector now.
Okay.
Because I think over the 20 years, some people have done it fantastically well. Some people have fell by the wayside. I think to have a scene as vibrant now, but also with the quality and consistency that I did see back in America in the days. You know, there were real challenging beer styles, but technically very good beers as well. And I don't think we quite had that to start with, but I think hopefully that will be something that we see more and more, because we're drinking the best beer ever, you know, in this country. Consumers have never had A, choice, and B, quality of beer in the existence of beer.
Definitely agree. Making me thirsty.
Yeah.
Cool. And then Jaipur obviously then, you know, became a force within the brewery.
Yep.
And so one thing that is very interesting is, you know, I think not everyone, obviously every brewery sets out to do different things, but I think there's a lot of breweries, especially ones that want to either, you know, nowadays efficiency does matter, costs are higher, but also scale, like having one brand that is your kind of hero beer is critical, but also very difficult to do. Like what along the journey, what are some of the things that you did with Jaipur, whether that's protecting it or whether it's promoting it, that allowed it to not just be this thing that was a moment in time, but something that today is iconic. Right?
Yeah.
Like how did that happen?
I think that's because we stuck to our word on it, and we've never compromised on it. It's still 5.9%, still the same amount of hops that we were putting back in the day. There are other beers that came around afterwards, very similar, but generally have been what I call dumbed down.
Okay.
And are falling away now. And I think what we did with Jaipur was we stayed true to our word. We didn't get some people taking it because they said it was too strong. And we'd always have another beer for those sort of people to take. But, generally we wanted that beer to be a 5.9 IPA, still brewed in the same style we did it 20 years ago.
One of the things that often doesn't get talked about very much, but in order to do that, I think it's an amazing point because it's something that when you say it, just seems so bloody obvious.
Yeah.
But at the same time, in reality, it's very hard to do because there's always those pulls. Sometimes it's internal, like the sales team is like, hey, if we did this, we could.
Yeah.
But one of the things is that you've had control over the business.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so your point about not making sacrifices, ultimately that decision, you're accountable to that Jim and whoever, are accountable to that decision. Not everyone with growth has kept themselves in that position, and that's
absolutely
what
there's other factors there pulling, isn't there?
Yeah.
But one of them will always be it's a little bit of how quickly you want to get there, isn't it? And taking 20 years to get where we are would have been much too slow for some people.
Sure.
And that's, again, that goes back to what we're talking about today. That's the path, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's our path's taken us 20 years to get to where we are, where we sit very comfortably with a great stable of beers, some fantastic people working in the business and enjoying coming to work every day. Could we have done that in 10 years? Probably. Would it have been enjoyable? Probably not. Would we still be here now? Possibly not.
Yeah.
So I think it's suited Jim and I.
Okay.
I think it suited us in that respect. We didn't have external investors who were pushing us. We need growth. We need growth. We've always had growth, and generally double-digit growth, but it's not been triple-digit growth, or it's not been a forced growth. I think we've been quite a organic business, and generally the sales have gone like that over the years, and that's been driven by us and the capacity we've got. So to kind of wrap this up, so super interesting. Thank you. What you mentioned there. So Thornbridge, 20 years ago, maybe let's say 15 years ago. Yep.
What you envisaged then, is it more or less where you're at now?
I think so. Yeah. But again, if you say where we're going to be in 10 years' time, I don't know actually.
Sure.
And again, in 2010, would we have seen the scene that exists now, which since COVID has had a bit of a slapping from the big boys who have reasserted themselves certainly in grocery, but certainly and in bars, have shown what money buys listings, and it's so what will happen in the next 5 or 10 years, I'm not too sure. As I alluded to, we're pretty happy where we are. So yeah, 10, 15 years ago, if we'd have said we're here, we've been pretty happy, yeah.
I think that's good. One of the things that, with what I do now, say advisory stuff, one of the things that I always start with is like the destination, because people are like, we want to do this. Like, what do you think about this? It's like, well, what do you want to achieve? Like, success doesn't. There's no definition to success. Success is what you define it, right? And so it doesn't mean you have to know where you want to be in 20 years, but at the same time, you got to know where you're going to point the boat.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with that. When people talk about what's your exit, I often think we don't have to have an exit.
Yeah.
We've had conversations over the years with a number of people about things, but it's almost, if you haven't got an exit, it's like, well, what are you doing? And we're building a business, and we're only 20 years into it, and there's a lot of breweries a lot older than us. So I think it's an interesting. We're building a culture, we're building a business, and we're just on the journey.
Awesome, love it. I can't wait to drink Thornbridge beers 20 years from now. You mentioned grocery there. I wanted to touch on that because I think grocery is something that I think is very misunderstood within beer. But you guys have obviously had a very interesting journey in grocery as well. So maybe let's start there. Can you kind of give the summary, like what has been your grocery journey from start to today?
Yeah, our grocery journey started with Waitrose when we bought a bottling line back in 2010, and we brewed and we bottled Jaipur, Kipling, a couple of others, St. Petersburg, and we sold them to Waitrose. And generally, we said to every other grocer, "Oh, we've got an exclusive agreement with Waitrose." Even though we didn't have an exclusive agreement with Waitrose, it just meant that actually that was our line. That's all we can produce. So we had a great partnership with Waitrose for maybe 3 or 4 years, and then in 2015, we bought a bigger bottling line. And that bottling line was very expensive, which meant we need to sell a lot more bottled beer. So we opened that conversation up then with everyone else. We effectively got listings with all of the grocers and carried on that. And in 2020, we put a canning line in of the same spec. And then when COVID hit, we were incredibly busy.
I know how that felt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, in that respect, grocery saved us. Leading into COVID, we were 50-50 split on and off. And we were 25% keg, 25% cask, 25% bottle, 25% can. Quite a nice place to be. Yeah. No customer over 9% of sales. During COVID, that changed.
Changed for everyone.
And we had growth. Bizarrely, twice we expanded, did little expansions, and at one stage we had a customer who were about 35% of our total, which was slightly uneasy for us.
Yeah.
And then generally, as the bars opened up and pubs opened up, we have always seen ourselves as a pub drink. The grocer helped along with that. We then had to drop out some of the grocery to get beer available because we're at full capacity to get beer available for the on-trade again. So that was a couple of years of teaming and ladling, which we didn't always get right. And where we sit now, we're probably 75-25 on to off, which feels about right for us. We're sort of listed with all the grocers bar one, and we have some good volumes in there. We have some good relationships in there, and that feels about right. Do we want any more growth? Probably not. We have like anybody in grocery, you have a churn of products. So some come for 12 months, replaced by another one, and that sort of thing, which is quite interesting for the consumer.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I find super interesting is I might not get the wording on this completely right, but you did have a bit of a pullback from grocery.
Yeah.
As you say, kind of let's say migrate into where you really wanted that volume for the strategy of the business. Obviously COVID played a role in that. But it's a big thing because, I can't think of many examples of breweries that have pulled volume out of grocery and back into other channels. I don't know if you...
No, probably not. No.
and I think, grocery too...
Are we on the right path again? Who knows?
Well, no, but I admire it, quite frankly, because I think, grocery is a bit of a spiral, right? And I think what you said is really interesting because you're talking about channels and products like strategically, like we want to be this. We want, like you're talking about what you want to be, and you're controlling how the volume then represents that. The thing with grocery is there's a couple of things that happen. One is oftentimes people have like a gap, like, oh, we need to fill 5,000 hectoliters in the brewery. Let's just go get some grocery volume. Sure. But then once you get into grocery, it's a cycle, right? Yeah, then you buy new tanks, and then I remember, without naming names, but I remember at one point we had bought some new tanks, and we had a grocery buyer be like, got you guys, like basically like, well, how are you going to pay for those tanks? And they they push us hard on price. Yeah. So there is this spiral that comes with it, because if you get too big in grocery, grocers know that you can't pull away from it because you can't sustain the size of your brewery and the investment you've made. But you've done that in a controlled way, where you said, this is, we manage our growth, this is what we want to be, and as that volume becomes available in the places that you prefer the balance of the business to be, you start migrating that volume, right? So again, it's control. I don't know.
It is.
I've kind of spoken there, but does that represent?
I think you're right. I think that represents exactly the path. But and also, I think it's difficult to get it right. And I wouldn't say we got it right, because it's not like for like. You lose that listing there, you don't replace it with a pub group there. It's not like that. So for 18 months, we sort of we probably struggled a little bit to sort of fill up where we were dropping out, but one of the things with grocery is it's glossy, flashy. It's great to see in cans or your bottles on a shelf, isn't it? When you go shopping, sort of thing. Oh look, there we are. It's fantastic. Very, very visible. You know, when that lorry comes and takes away 15 pallets of Jaipur cans, it's like, wow, that looks really good, doesn't it? Sort of thing. You know, when they're lined up. So it draws you in, grocery. It really draws you in. But ultimately, I think the idea, it tends to be lower margin. I think people accept that. It's more simple sort of stuff. But fundamentally, we had to get to a situation where we had too much in grocery. So we had to stop playing certain games with grocers who you're right, once you're on the hook, you know, it's tough because they're delivering big numbers for you, but actually you're almost thinking, I don't want to play that game anymore. And when you start saying no to things, it tends to start dropping out. You know, we're still approached by grocers now saying, if you just reduce your prices a bit more, we know we can push this even further. And we're like, we don't really want to push it any further.
What a position to be in, though, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
No, we're fortunate there, and you know. But others will take that space. As you say, there's a clamour and those shelves, those facings have come really down as well, haven't they? You know, going back to, you know, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, when Tesco discovered craft beer and gave big aisles to it and took out the slabs, that shrunk. That's undoubtedly shrunk. The slabs are back.
Yeah, and I think the thing you know that you see with grocery too is that you talked about margin. Like on single cans, margin it's not that bad.
No,
depends. But like once you get into 4-packs, I mean, there's no craft brewery that do well on margin in 4-packs, right? And that's one thing that I don't think a lot of people in the industry. So okay, you get this grocery volume, you're doing well in single cans. What's the reward? The reward is to go into 4-pack. That's the reward, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But okay, we can do this in 4-pack. It's like, but what are you really going to make on that 4? So why are you doing it? Like, it's not. I'm not anti it. I think it's about having the strategy for it as opposed to using that as you say. It's like it can be very overwhelming because you're like, all this volume, we could get all this revenue, we could fill the brewery, we could do all this stuff, but right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then it grows so big that to stop it is like, ooh.
Yeah, and then you're on the roller coaster.
Absolutely, yeah. But we had products, 4-packs in grocers where when a certain deal was triggered, we were like, they're making no money on this.
Yeah, it's a lot.
You know, and then all of a sudden you're in the crossfire. You're a commodity at that stage.
Yeah.
You know, so you know your 4-packs that price, but if you buy 2 4-packs, it's only that. And they're like, and we're not funding that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's an interesting one. So far, so good with us. We're really happy with the grocers we've got now. We have a great relationship with them. They're really receptive to new stuff and asking us about stuff, and we're going to roll an interesting concept out with Morrison's later this year. Nice. So we still enjoy that fun, but you know we've only got so much beer for it.
Sure,
that's the thing.
And then I wanted to talk about the rebrand. I love it's still one of my favorite rebrands ever in the history of craft beer, because this was 2018.
Yeah. 2018
with Thirst, was it? Thirst Craft.
Thirst, they were great guys.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who I also rate highly. I just start bluntly, like, what was the brief?
It was always a difficult one because we'd been very. So when we changed, originally we had the hall on pump clips and on bottles. When we moved away from the hall, 2010, I decided to take something from the hall, and that was the statue Flora. So Flora had done the sort of thing all the way through, and then when it came to the rebrand, it was like, how now? Because it was part when you know we're going into can as well. How now do we bring in a new brand but stand out? And going around grocers and everywhere, we were looking at shelves and there was so much noise, some beautiful cans, but how did you stand out on that? And we actually took the inspiration from not particularly our contemporaries, but more from, say, Estrella or Pilsner Urquell, and we were blocking colours. and we were trying to own colours, sort of stuff along the way, sort of thing. So a simplicity to it. And then the guys from Thirst we had quite a few goes at this, as you can well imagine. It wasn't first hit win.
It wasn't a Jaipur.
No. We were, and the day they came up with the hand-drawn brocade, which came from the fireplace in Jim's house, it just went bang, that's it. And then it was a case of choosing the colourways and almost coming out with what we wanted to be modern classics that actually, Jaipur was always around orange and pink until that time. And then we always spoke about it as orange and pink. Jaipur was a pink city, that was the reason behind it, sort of thing. And pink's really fallen away with Jaipur. And we were looking at it and said, it's actually orange. Everything, all our POS, everything else is just orange. So really, we just wanted to own that orange then. And hopefully we've sort of done that with them, sort of thing, really.
Yeah, I think the ability to, I mean, you just said the modern classic, which is a really great summary of what's in my head. But, I think one of the things is that, oftentimes when breweries rebrand, you lose a little bit of the meaningfulness, the tradition of it. And I think it was such a great example of, wow, it stands out. Like the Jaipur can stands out. But at the same time, it still felt very Thornbridge, right?
Yeah.
And I have to say, like, Thornbridge has an incredible ability to manage this concept of modern classic, right? So the can is one thing, but like, I lived up near Leeds for the better part of 3-4 years, and walk into like the Banker's Cap.
Yeah.
It's like, it's old school, but it's not, right?
No, absolutely.
And then, I had some other examples here, but you've got this balance, like the bars, the collaborations as well, right? So you do collaborations, obviously, with a lot of very modern breweries, but then you've done Timothy Taylor's. Their first collaboration was with them, with Budvar, right? You did that one. Was that Checkmates? Was that the one?
She's still going now, yeah.
And then the other thing is this idea that, okay, like you were the first brewery to use Nelson Sauvin hops, right? But you're also the first and now only brewery in the world that has a Burton Union system, right? Yeah. Like there's such a contrast between tradition and modern, or classic and modern. Yeah. Like, how do you get that to work so well?
Our first sort of tagline 20 years ago was a contemporary take on traditional thinking. And I think we've probably had that at the back, because we didn't invent beer. Brewdog did, obviously. But we came around with modern beer, and we wanted to try and put our little layer on it then, and bring some modernity to what we'd seen from elsewhere. So I think we've always had that at the forefront of what we do. And you're right, a lot of the interesting stuff that we do is actually bringing back traditional things, some old beer styles which are fantastic. The one we did with the Colonel sort of stuff was just fantastic on the Union system sort of thing. Doing an old Burton Ale, and some of these are great beers, and we're probably making them better than they were back in the day because of the use of technology we've got and that sort of thing. And some of the beer styles have been fantastic, and we're just up for an award for best new beer style of the year with the Brewers Journal guys, and that's a strong dark mild. Okay. There's no sort of hops knocking around there sort of thing. So I think the consumer now is on this journey. They're shaping it. And we're sort of just nodding back. Everything was thrown away to start. It was all new. And generally, a lot of stuff gets bypassed. So we're re-looking at old styles of beer and that sort of thing. And with the unit now, we're able to put them on that system and make beer like would have probably been made 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's just the ability to kind of read the room, if you will, where it's like, innovate. But then it's like, especially with this Burton Union thing, it's like just when, and everyone's almost to a degree, there's like innovation everywhere. It's just like, you just went the exact opposite. And it's just it's innovation by going backwards.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's like this ability to do that just always kind of keeps you relevant, which I find
I think that's
remarkable.
what won the Zebra Award on innovation. It was the Union system.
Okay. Funny, right?
Yeah, fantastic. But again, I go back to it.
as well as another example.
And we're telling stories though, and telling stories help sell beer, because the stories around beer are fantastic. How the evolve of a style came about, or the way they sort of brewed something in a different way. They're all really interesting stories. So if you can tell those stories along the way, you can actually premiumize it as well.
Yeah.
So you look at something like the Union, we see that as our premium offer.
Sure.
And this is a system that was thrown away by Carlsberg.
I wish we had more time for you to tell me the entire story of it. But
absolutely.
One day, or maybe after this, you can tell me because I was thinking how did that, how do you even find, how do you find that was an opportunity?
Well, it was through Garrett Oliver,
Yeah.
got good friendship, and he was told they were being made silent.
Crazy. Right people, right place, right
Absolutely.
time.
Serendipity. We still don't have a beer named it, but we should.
You've been talking a lot. I'm gonna do a bit of a pause in the action here and do one thing. So, do you know about Sellar? Do you know Sellar?
Yeah, we use Sellar.
Okay.
So I particularly don't get into the use of Sellar, but all our guys do.
Okay.
It's been a great platform for us.
Cool. So Sellar are the supporters of the podcast, are the ones that have really helped make this happen. Now, I worked with them as part of my business last year, so I got to know them really well, the founders and the team. Rate them a lot. And one of the things is, it's funny because when I started this idea of path makers, and by all means, now's the time to drink some water. When I started, I was like, the concept of sponsorship to me, I'm not someone who likes to I want the content to be fluid, sure. Right? And so I didn't put out an ask to a bunch of businesses. I went up to Julian, one of the founders at London Craft Beer, and I was like, I want you guys to sponsor this because it's a great fit. You guys are path makers to me. There's a lot of success still to prove for Sellar, but I just love their way of thinking. They look, and they're not from the beer industry, not the founders, some of the team is. And they look at systems and they try and figure out what's broken and try and fix it. I guess to a degree similar to and so that's the journey that they've been on. And one of the things that we're going to do, which I really like, is instead of doing promotional this is Sellar, you should know about them. What we're going to do is actually just do a bonus episode with them. So I think that's going to come at some point. I'll obviously let the viewers and listeners know when that's going to come, but I highly suggest you tune in because it's kind of raw and cut. Yeah. There's going to be nothing scripted this. So anyway, tune into that, and a big thanks to Sellar for helping make that happen. Now that you've had a little of H2O ready to go, shift gears a little bit. I want to ask some opinions from you. So one question, this has bothered me for some time. Now, of course, as everyone can obviously tell, I'm not from the UK. I'm born and raised in Canada. I moved to the UK in 2016. And so I don't have a lot of the history of the growing up, especially around cask. So if you have a beer, and I'm talking not about reality, I'm talking about your opinion. If you have a beer that is put into keg and cask, and someone is buying those things, in your opinion, should those be the same price? Should one be more expensive than the other? Which? Why? What's your thoughts?
I mean, this is an age-old one, and this is come up in conversation with us, as you can imagine, many times over the years. So generally, whenever we brought over some of our customers from overseas, they'll generally go into one of our pubs and see cask there, and then notice that some macro lager is £1 a pint more, and it's but this is the beer of the UK. This is artisanal craft beer. I'm like, no, it is, but unfortunately, he didn't start like that. So again, you go back 20 years ago, all the young kids talking about, the natural wines and and they've all got this super premium sort of stuff, and poor old cask beer, which is a live product, which is made with yeast, which only has a very short shelf life, and has to be handled really well. It's well, that's cheaper end, and it's odd. It'll never change now.
You don't think it will?
No, I think that gap's too big, okay. and part of me, and I've said this before, part of me hopes it doesn't, because what I would like to see is affordability in the bar, and I think cask can offer that at times. I think it can be we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years bar prices just rocket, and especially on macro lagers where you're paying £6.50 for a pint of badly brewed
terrible
malt
nothing more
continental
disappointing
lager.
than that, right?
Yeah. So I think cask beer. My son and his friends are now at sort of drinking age, and they're looking at cask beers because remember there's modernity to casks now, so it's not like 20 years ago. So you can be drinking good fruity pale ales, hop forward sort of beers, hazy beers sort of stuff as well. So, but there is an affordability on cask more than keg, and I quite like that.
Okay. Because
I think it allows beer's an everyman product. It has to be. There has to be affordability to beer, and I think cask will always have that price differential. The differential I previously had a high opinion that it should be more, and now I'm coming around to the thing that actually I think what cask beer does, it brings affordability to it. A 3.5% cask beer will be at a good price. We're going to open a bar in London in a couple of months, and we will have a sub £5 pint. And we'll be opposite a particular bar where their cheapest beer is £6.99, and that's for an AF version.
Crazy.
Because I just think well-kept cask beer is a fantastic thing, but it's a weak beer. It's born and raised in a week, and it can be out fresh on the bar.
Yeah.
And there's a certain newness and affordability to that. That doesn't need to be super premium. Obviously, Jaipur is going to be the most expensive beer in our bar, and that's down to the amount of hops that are in there, and the duty rates, of course.
It's just interesting because when you go back to talking about the education of the consumer and craft and how that played such a big role. Like again, I'm naive, but at the same time, sometimes being naive gives you.
No. Well, again, the thing with the premiumization of craft beer obviously came from the States.
Yeah.
Cask beer doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So it was always going to be the big hoppy.
There's a mental construct here,
cool.
Isn't there?
Yeah.
What prompted the question is back in my past, one of the bars that we had, I walked in one day and the same beer was on cask and on keg, and it was cheaper on cask. And I was like, why would we be doing that?
Yeah.
Oh, because what you said, and I was just like, I just couldn't wrap my head around it. I'm like, and to the point about storytelling and stuff, it's like, of course there is this construct that you have to break that I don't have, but I get, but there is an incredible amount of storytelling there. Like you just said it in a sentence about live product. It's in a week. It's like all this stuff.
And I think what we've tried to do in the tap room is we have Green Mountain on cask and on keg, and we've equalised the prices on that.
Okay.
With the notion that actually, if you want a very hoppy New England style IPA on cask, it's going to cost you the same as that sort of thing. But there is an affordability to a malty, a Lord Marples, which it comes in far less. And then when you look at the duty implication to something like a pint of Wild Swan at 3.4%, it can be affordable. Yeah. So for so long, and in so many places, it happens that you go into a bar and all the cask beer is virtually the same price, regardless of the ingredients in it. So I think an educational piece around beer again and the storytelling, that one's that much because it uses that sort of thing and a ladder almost on the bar to build to a
journey there.
I think so.
So 20 years, you've seen a lot. You've seen a lot in this industry. What, in your opinion, how is the industry really doing? Because obviously we hear a lot of stuff, but you're in it, right? How's it doing?
I mean, first and foremost, you see yourself, and at the moment we're sort of, it's a real battle to get to our happy place. We are, there's not, you're working twice as hard. It really is hard work, I think, and we're fortunate to have some really good people, and we have a brand that people seemingly want, and it's tough. It's really tough out there, and I don't think anybody's having it easy out there, whether it be cask or keg or whatever, can or bottle or whatever. It's hard work, as I say, since the war in Ukraine. I think we've just seen prices spiral like we never saw, and I think we've lost a few people along the way with that as well. Some brewers have gone, which is a real shame. But I still believe there's a thirst for better beer, and you're only going to get better beer from us guys. The big boys aren't doing better beer. They might have shinier labels and they might have lovely glassware.
They'll tell you
they're
it's
not.
Better.
Yeah, exactly. They'll tell you, but it's not better. And I think that's something that we have as an industry, that we will make beer better. And I think that goes back to my boringness of saying consistency and quality. Because if we can keep to that line, then actually that will premiumise eventually, and does at times. You know, you see it in London. You know, they always talk about the £10 pint and that sort of thing. But you know, I think the premiumisation of better beer has to. Be
I guess the big guys, they at the end of the day have a lot of money. And if you're trying to say the same things as them, you're never going to stand out because they're going to. But the one thing that you can't talk is the quality of the product, right? Like if you try something, you like it or you don't, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so last question before we move on to the last part. So I want to talk about segmentation. Before I get into the question, I might just explain very briefly what segmentation is for any viewers or listeners that don't know. So there's a lot of bars in the UK. Ultimately, every brewery makes a decision of who they want to sell to. They'll create segments to do that. So I want to sell to only these ones, independent ones, or take the big breweries, for instance. They overanalyze segmentation like crazy. It's like 10 tiers, most premium, that kind of thing. The reason I asked you the question is because I think Thornbridge is got a super interesting, at least result with this. I don't know the approach, but because ultimately it's an incredibly well-loved brewery, iconic brewery, and premium brewery. But you also make yourself accessible to segments like grocery, and you're in Wetherspoons as well. So I just wanted to ask, what is this segmentation approach, or do you not think of it that way? How does it work for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we do think of it in that way, but on a broader sort of level, in that, you know, as a board, we sat down 10 years ago and said we want to get Jaipur to be available to anybody who wants to try it. I think grocery gave us that. You know, we were able, as I said, we're in, you know, a couple of thousand Tesco stores across Britain, and people, if they wanted to try Jaipur, they could, and they did, you know, and loved it. And what that did is, it then cascaded down, and other grocers took it, and So it got Jaipur out in grocery as a national product, which is still out there now. I think with cask beer, we've worked with pub groups all the way through, whether it be Wetherspoons, M&B, whoever. And I think when we did the thing with Wetherspoons, they launched this thing called a class act, where they'd have Grey Goose vodka, Jack Daniels. Jaipur was the premium cask beer. So we were quite privileged to have that sort of thing. So even in the Wetherspoons we'll take them now, we're probably the most expensive beer on the bar, cask beer on the bar. And it's been incredible, the thirst of the drinker to actually go to Wetherspoons to drink Jaipur, because as much as we think Jaipur is always available, on cask it's not. So it's across the country sort of thing, and we've had people walking out of Wetherspoons because they couldn't get a pint of Jaipur. But in the same respect, what that's done is that's given us a real, what I call, national branding opportunity that has now meant that with that we've actually got a new listing in Fuller's pubs for Jaipur. And other pub groups now saying, oh yeah, we like, all of a sudden we've sort of stepped up to be a national treasure, and we're seeing complementary sales alongside that, as we did in grocery when we did it back then.
It's interesting because it sounds like, well, from that board decision to say, you know, I guess to be a household name, you have to be available to households, don't you? But I think, you know, it sounds like the approach is, instead of saying we want to be premium by only selling to premium places, what you're saying is we want to be accessible to all, but we want to be the most premium option to those people. So someone who goes into Wetherspoons, and maybe they're not going into buy their beer in Rainville, bottle shop, that kind of thing. They're going to see Jaipur as that's the premium, that's the top end, right?
It's part of the class act.
Right, okay.
And I think also what you've got in there is the way around we've gone it, the same as in groceries, we haven't diluted the product. It's not now a 5% cask beer on the bar or a 5.4% cask beer on the bar. It's still 5.9%. Yeah. It's still the same beer. Amazing. You know, and it's, you know, we have many drinkers of Jaipur. They don't fit one category.
You make it available to people, but you make it what it is and see if they want it,
and what it
costs.
Pay your money, you take your choice.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of that.
Cool. The last one is a little bit of fun here. I'm going to do a bit of a rapid fire round.
Okay.
So for these questions, it's going to be about 5, maybe 6 questions. For these questions, if you could respond with one word or one sentence at most, right? So just go with what comes first. Name a brewery that excites you today that's not called Thornbridge.
That's a difficult one because I alluded to excitement going out of the industry. But what would excite me now is reading an old school list of American brewers and seeing Sierra Nevada Pale Ale being on a bar.
Okay.
Fresh.
Your go-to Thornbridge beer?
It has to be Jaipur.
Okay. One brand outside of beer that has inspired you?
I've always said I could align ourselves with something like Barber, independently owned.
Is that the jacket?
The jackets. Yeah, okay. We started off as a protection jackets, whether it be oilskin, through to motorbikes, through to fashion, but having family-run integrity within there, but modernised along the way.
Cool. Last beer you drank?
It was actually a bottle of Jaipur last night. So
we didn't prepare this.
No.
One beer industry prediction that you think will happen within 10 years?
Craft will rise again.
Nice, I like it. Last one. One sentence you'd say to inspire others to blaze their own path.
I've said it before, just do it.
Okay, awesome. That's great. Thank you so much.
Cool. It's been a pleasure.
It's been so good to chat, and obviously for you to take the time and do this. I know you got lots going on. I think you're going over to the Wild Swan after this, are you?
Yeah, so we're going to have a look over
When is it open?
Yeah. We're hoping start of November.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I will be there.
Good stuff.
And thanks everyone for tuning in, listening or watching this. We obviously will have episode 2 coming out next. Episode 2 is with Jasper Cuppage, the founder of Camden Town Brewery. Obviously very different businesses, but started not too dissimilar of time, a few years after you. So thanks everyone, and we'll catch you next time.
Cool.